Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Women in Internal Audit virtual event on overcoming the imposter syndrome. Thank you for taking time to join us. I'm Elizabeth Honer, Chief Executive of the Government Internal Audit Agency, and we provide internal audit and counter-fraud and investigation services to the majority of central government. And I'm delighted that I'm also on the steering group for Women in Internal Audit. Before I introduce you to Jo Clift, our speaker for today, just a few housekeeping instructions for how the event will run. We recommend that you join with computer audio for the best sound quality. If you have any thoughts, reflections or questions during the event, please submit them using the Q&A tab rather than chat. And at the end of Jo's talk, we'll then address those questions, but do also include some reflections and thoughts. We are recording today's session, and the link to the recording will be made available on the Chartered Institute of Internal Audit website within the week. I'm delighted to introduce Jo Clift. She's an expert on overcoming the imposter syndrome. She is also an expert in personal and professional development. She works as a non-executive director, consultant and executive coach. Jo has worked at a senior level in central government for over 20 years. She was head of communications for the BSE inquiry and subsequently worked in senior policy, strategy and legislation roles. She's worked closely with many ministers over the years, including a role at number 10 Downing Street. She now works with senior teams and individuals who want to improve their impact and communication skills. Jo has a private sector experience as well as a senior manager at Deloitte Consulting. She's a published writer on the civil service and Brexit. And I'm really thrilled that Jo is a non-executive director at my own agency, the Government Internal Audit Agency, where she makes a very big difference, and also for the Institute for Osteopathy. Thank you very much, Jo. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I hope everybody can hear me. Welcome, everybody. It's sunny where I am. Good to see so many of you bright and early. I'm just going to go down. So I hope you're awake enough because I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. What we're going to look at today is what is the imposter syndrome, when are we likely to experience it, and I'm going to get into some practical solutions about what we can do about it. The first point I would like to make is that this is really quite a common experience. So for the people who've been feeling that they're the only one, that's very much not the case. So I've got here a slide with photographs of quite well-known people who've said that they either suffer from the imposter syndrome, they feel like a fraud, they feel like they don't deserve their success. So if you could just choose one that you feel surprised to see there, if there's somebody that you actually feel a bit nonplussed to see there, let me know. Somebody else correctly identified Albert Einstein, well done. Lady Gaga. Okay. So a quick rundown. So from the top left, Kate Winslet, then Serena Williams, Emma Watson, the actress, Tom Hanks, Jodie Foster, the actress. Underneath her, Meryl Streep. To her left, Lady Gaga, and then Maya Angelou, the writer. Ryan Reynolds, the actor, and then at the bottom, Albert Einstein. I don't think anybody's added the bottom right lady. That is Sheryl Sandberg. So she is number 2 at Facebook. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Facebook. So it's really quite a common experience. The other thing that I'm inviting you to do just before we get into the sort of content is think about when or where do you have your imposter syndrome triggered. So for some people, this is in sort of senior stakeholder meetings. For other people, it might be when they're thinking about applying for a job, or when they're preparing for a job interview, or when they're actually in the job interview. So try and get in touch with where it's triggered for you. And if you feel comfortable, then please put that in the chat box too. It just gets us a bit started and grounded in what's actually happening for people. Presentations is a common one, yeah. Definitely senior stakeholder meetings. That's helpful, thank you. Now, let's get into a few details. So, what do we describe as the imposter syndrome? So my definitions are that you don't feel that you belong. So it could be in the room, it could be in your role, it could be in your team, it could be in your organisation. You generally lack confidence and feel that others are better than you. So you make an assumption that others know more than you, have better skills, have better experience. And then you diminish your successes and achievements, but you highlight your challenges and difficulties. And this is a really important one, because what happens with the people that I meet that say they suffer with imposter syndrome is that they've forgotten that all the things that they are good at, that they enjoy doing, and that are really skills, strings to their bow, they forget that everybody else doesn't have those. So there's a common mistake, which is that people focus on the things they can't do, and they forget about all the things that they can do and all the skills and experience that they do have. Okay, so these are very common statements that we hear from people with imposter syndrome, and let me know in the Q&A whether you identify with any of these. So I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm getting away with it. There's a famous piece of research done in the States where they spoke to college students in the States, and the ones with imposter syndrome actually felt they'd been sent the wrong letter giving them a place at college. Everything I have achieved so far has been easy, and this is really important because it goes back to our point about thinking about what you don't do as opposed to what you do. So you have to remember that probably 80% of your role you are absolutely fine with and confident in, and then there's this 20% or 15% or 10% that you don't feel comfortable with, and the mistake is to focus on the 10 or 15 or 20%. I don't deserve my role, grade, bonus or praise. And there's another problem here, which is that this makes people very reluctant to ask for feedback, which is one of the things that we really need to focus on to get over imposter syndrome. So feeling that you just don't deserve your position, really. If I don't get everything right, then I have failed. So it's quite common to hear from people with imposter syndrome quite a sort of perfectionist tendency. So people will say, well, I feel like I have to get the report absolutely right before I circulate it. I don't feel I can sort of start it, send it out, ask for a comment, and then keep working on it and then send it out again and ask for a comment. I feel as though I've got to make it all right first. Everyone knows more than I do, so this assumption that other people have the skills and experience and you don't. I'm not good enough, very common. I shouldn't need to ask for support or help. Now, to people with imposter syndrome, this feels completely logical, but of course, if somebody in your team said to you, I feel like I shouldn't ask for support or help, you would find that strange. So we need to kind of start to examine these tendencies. And then if I try something new, I'm going to fail and be exposed. So the people who said in the Q&A that they struggle with presentations, often that means that people won't volunteer for presentations. And that stops them getting to the other side, stops them actually realizing that they can do it and that it is possible and that they can learn skills. Anyone want to comment on any of those that they feel that applies to them in the Q&A box? Or are you all feeling shy this morning? Elizabeth and I can talk about this as well later. So, I'm just going to do a contrast now with somebody that I think doesn't suffer from the imposter syndrome. I think it's important to think about what's on the opposite side of the road. So my assertion is that people who don't suffer from imposter syndrome are comfortable with their success and their skills. They own their success and their skills, but they don't expect themselves to be brilliant at everything. So they're comfortable with their weaknesses. And I think this is quite an important distinction. Now, I'm going to put a photograph up of somebody that I don't think suffers from the imposter syndrome. If anybody can identify her, can you put that in the Q&A? So this is obviously a female footballer. Her name is Megan Rapinoe, and she was the American captain during the Women's Football World Cup, and they won the Women's World Cup. And I don't really follow football, but what I thought was interesting was that when she scores a goal, she runs up to her supporters and she stands very straight, and then she adopts this arms out position, as if to say, I am successful, we are successful, everything is going really well. And I thought that was really interesting. And a lot of people, when they see this photograph, they say, oh, well, she's American, and they're very comfortable with their success, and they're slightly arrogant or very arrogant. But I think unless we can recognize what we're good at, and unless we can recognize our success, we can't actually get rid of this imposter syndrome sentiment. And what I'm trying to sort of illustrate is that you're not supposed to be perfect at everything, because you wouldn't be human. You're just supposed to be as good as you can at the things that you're good at, and then hopefully improve on the other things as you go along as well. So I'm just going to share a couple of experiences of my own imposter syndrome from the past. And so I was in government for 24 years, and one event that I always remember is that I was in Seattle at a Microsoft conference, and I was there to make sure I was working directly with a very senior official, and I was there to make sure that everything went smoothly, and I was running his private office. I was making sure that nothing went wrong when we had speeches and press events. And one morning he had a meeting scheduled with Bill Gates at Bill Gates' office at Redmond. And everything was arranged, all the transport was arranged, all the papers were arranged, who was going, etc., etc. So off they went, very early one morning, and I just carried on having breakfast, went to the conference, bumped into a colleague of mine about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he said, why didn't you come to the meeting with Bill? And he wasn't being aggressive, he was just asking me why I hadn't been there. And the penny just dropped, and I thought, well, why didn't I go? It was sort of expected that I would go by everybody except me, so that was a bit of a salutary lesson. And I still would like to see the inside of Bill Gates' office, so to speak. And the other one was when I was Director of Shared Services for Government. And it was a job that I held for about 3 years. And I used to get emails from headhunters, and they would say, dear Joe, we have a private sector role in shared services. Do you know anybody who's interested? And I assumed they wanted me to tell them other people that I knew who might be interested. And the penny didn't drop for about 18 months, 2 years, that actually they were asking me if I wanted to be interested in those roles. So please let those be lessons to you, and don't let opportunities pass you by. So I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is that you can tackle imposter syndrome. You can definitely move on from it. You can definitely tackle it on a long-term basis and be rid of it. But it's work. And that's what this fairy godfather represents. There is no magic wand that can take this away from you. You have to invest the time and the effort and the energy to make it change. So we're going to go straight into how to make it change. So after working with this subject for a couple of years, these are my suggestions about how you move on from imposter syndrome. The first one is to get feedback. And a lot of people who are suffering with imposter syndrome find this very difficult and have got completely out of the habit of asking for feedback and dread appraisals, etc., etc. But you don't have to start with asking for feedback about difficult programs, and you don't have to ask feedback from difficult people, certainly at least initially. So my feeling is just try and get into the habit of asking for feedback, even if it's on a small scale, and certainly initially with people that you like and trust and respect, so that you can build your confidence and your competence in getting feedback. The other one is document your skills, and I've got an exercise that I'm going to suggest to you in a moment that works through that. But actually committing to yourself of what you think your skills and your knowledge and experience are is very powerful. But it's only powerful if you really focus on it and really concentrate on it and really try and absorb the fact that you do have this knowledge and experience. The other one is share thoughts, feelings and difficulties. So please don't suffer alone. You may already know people in your team or in your wider organisation who you think are struggling with the same things, and you'd be very surprised how many senior people are also struggling with some of these feelings. Male and female. The first course I ran in imposter syndrome, more men booked than women. So sharing your thoughts, feelings and difficulties is a really good way of realising that you're not unusual and that you can support each other. Celebrate your successes and share them with others. Some of us have got a bit out of the habit of sharing and celebrating success, but that's how you consolidate what went well and what you feel proud of. Say yes when you feel like saying no to opportunities. So, for example, the people who said they struggle with presentations, that doesn't mean you have to immediately say yes when somebody asks you to do a presentation to 300-400 people, but you might say yes to a smaller engagement and then build your confidence and then move up to something bigger. Or, if we just got something in the chat box, we'll come back to that, Jane. If you're thinking of applying for a job and you're dealing with that sort of voice inside that says, no, I haven't really got quite the right experience, then why not apply for the job, get your thoughts on paper, put yourself in the front foot, because that's how you grow your confidence and how you lose your imposter syndrome, basically. Getting support. Remembering that not everything is difficult. So the bits of the work that you find enjoyable and easy and satisfying, don't take them for granted. Don't think that everybody finds them easy, because they don't. Those are things that are in your skill set, in your skill box, if you like. Excuse me. Decide that being good is actually good enough. Now, I'm not suggesting that just because you've seen that on a PowerPoint, that's going to be easy to do, because sometimes it takes years to change that opinion. But the reality is that it's only you that can change your attitude, and if you're going to have a very sort of perfectionist view, then you're always going to be feeling that you're not quite delivering what you should deliver. So decide that being good enough is good enough. Getting to know your style and how you work best. So a lot of people say, well, I'm an introvert and my organisation doesn't understand me, doesn't know how to get the best out of me, or I have imposter syndrome, but I'm an extrovert, so everybody thinks I'm fine. So there's a bit of, quite a lot of self-knowledge that is involved in how you can make the best contribution and how you can train the people around you to help you make the best contribution. So if you hate brainstorming and you just want to go away and think about it, then try and find a way to do that rather than feeling that you have to fit in to how your organisation is asking you to behave. Ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? So, Elizabeth and I were online here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was quite nervous. I don't know about Elizabeth. But, what was the worst thing that could happen? I guess the worst thing that could happen was my broadband failed and we had to reschedule the webinar and you all went to have a cup of coffee. So you have to sort of do some thought experiments to think, what is the worst thing that can actually happen? And speak up when you feel like playing small. So again, if people are asking you to do something and you think, or you're being asked to contribute to a meeting and you feel like shrinking, that's the time to put your best foot forward. A model that I really like and does help people, particularly in the senior stakeholder meetings, is that a lot of us make the mistake at work of going into parent or child mode. So we assume that senior stakeholders are our parents. We don't do this consciously, we just do it unconsciously in the room. We just sort of become a bit more deferential and a bit less empowered. And that makes for quite a bad discussion normally. So if you are somebody who's really struggling with senior engagement, try and remember this model, which is that you're always aiming for the adult-to-adult form of communication. You're always aiming to remember why you're in the room. You're in the room because you have a role, you have a set of knowledge and experiences and expertise that the senior person doesn't have unless they've done your job before. So always try and couch it in your own mind as an adult-to-adult discussion, and that improves the interactions, improves the listening, it improves the dialogue, and it improves the relationship. And it's a real trap to fall into, to sort of come out of the adult-to-adult model. You should always use that model as your preferred model. Okay, let's have a think. So I'm going to go forward a little bit. So this is something that you can do on your own in the next sort of couple of minutes while we're talking, but I want you to think about one of your key skills. So this should be something that you really feel confident about and you'd like doing. Doesn't need to be a work skill. It could be, I'm a fantastic baker, or I'm a brilliant runner, or whatever it is. But it must be something that you can really, 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 really commit to. And then I want you to think about it in these terms. So if your skill is project management, you don't articulate it as, I am an okay project manager. You have, the way I always ask people to express this is you've got two sentences. The first sentence is an expression of your skill with an adjective. So in this case, it's I'm a great project manager. And then your second sentence is I'm very organized and I'm able to communicate clear goals and build excellent relationships with people. So this is what I mean by document your skills. It's an active process. You have to really think it through and then you have to really commit to it. And obviously we don't have a lot of time now, but this is something that you can do with a colleague, or you can do it on your own, or you can come back to it once a week or once a fortnight or once a month. But this is how you really build your confidence muscles, if you like. Okay. I'm going to raise a few questions. So if you're really, really struggling with the imposter syndrome, these are things that I suggest you ask yourself. Are you in the right role, organisation or team? That's not to say that you should be blaming others, but you should be thinking, is this a good fit for me? Have you got enough support? Are you clear about the priorities for your role? So have you had clear guidance about what to focus on and how to focus on it? Are you being affected by a previous line manager role or team? So lots of people who work in toxic teams take that imposter syndrome with them. What conditions do you like to work at your best? Are you too far inside your comfort zone? Have you checked out your assumptions about how confident others are? Would you benefit from coaching, mentoring, or shadowing? Have you thought about where your negative messages come from? So I'm not going to propose myself as a counsellor in these situations, but sometimes it's useful to unpick where those messages came from originally. And have you checked out whether your lack of confidence has any basis in reality? So those are my questions that I think you should pose if you feel quite stuck. And my final point that I want to make before we open things up is that feelings are not facts. And this sounds very easy to identify and tackle until you're in a situation where the sort of mist comes down and all you can feel is the feelings and you've disengaged from your thoughts. So going into a room and thinking, I don't really belong here, I don't deserve to be here, nobody really respects my opinion, those are feelings. Now, you might work in an organisation where that's true, but it's unusual. So it's one really important part of this process is to be unpicking feelings from facts so that you can deal with the reality situation, not the situation that's been created in your head that you're struggling with. And on that note, I think we'll move Elizabeth to thoughts and questions.
Jo, thank you so much. I mean, a fascinating presentation. And as you'll have been seeing, I think, from the comments, I mean, it's resonated so much with people, all the things you're saying. And I have to say, it certainly resonates with me. And just sort of an example where, well, firstly, I think the headhunter comment you make, the penny actually has dropped by you saying that this morning. I always think they actually do want me to recommend other people. And then when I was approached...
You mean they don't want you to recommend other people?
Well, they don't, right? I assume that is what they want.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you for that this morning. I learned that this morning. And then when I was approached and told about my current CEO job, I really hesitated about applying because it had the title Chief Executive, and I did not think I was a Chief Executive because of all the sorts of things that you've been describing there. We have had some questions in which I'll put to you, and then Jo, I'd also like a little bit of time to reflect on what you've been saying in the context of internal audit, actually, because many times our people and people on this call, the sort of nature of the role of internal audit is you're often engaging with people more senior than you are.
Yeah.
And so immediately there's that hierarchy thing kicks in.
Yeah.
And of course, there's been a comment on this in the questions, you don't have their business sector knowledge necessarily. You're coming at it independently with your skills as an auditor. So we might come back to that. You can put a bit of time to reflect on that. So there's been some really great questions. And one of those is about how you manage other people. So there was a question here about if you work with people and a manager, for example, or other seniors who put you down and actually won't allow you your place at the table. How have you dealt with that if you've been in that situation yourself, or how would you recognise, how would you suggest that people deal with that?
It's a brilliant question, and I think there's different levels. I'm going to do a quick plug, but that's not because I sort of need the money or anything, but I run a course on assertiveness, and actually a lot of those techniques are really, really important in the moment for how you deal with somebody who's kind of speaking down to you. Parent, adult, child is related to that as well. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the sort of headline advice in how you be assertive is that you always revert to I. So I think, I feel, I want, I would like, I believe. And you accept that you're not going to win all the arguments, and hopefully they won't be arguments. There's degrees of oppression, and I think, as you know, Elizabeth, one of the reasons I left Whitehall was because I found the culture quite toxic, where in terms of the department that I was working in. So sometimes you have to vote with your feet, but what I'm really against is people just feeling that they have to absorb that kind of treatment and absorb that kind of pressure, because it's so bad for your health and it's so bad for your well-being. And I don't necessarily think you can deal with it alone. I mean, I had a very good coach at the time when I decided to leave the civil service, and certainly it's really not that bad in a lot of places. I don't think we should sort of think that it's an endemic problem, but I think you might need help, support, tools, and to ask some of the questions that were on that question slide about, is this the right arena for me to be in?
So, and that I think resonates with some of the other questions. There was a question about to what extent should one sort of tackle this on your own, or to what extent actually do you get help from other people, and you've helpfully explored that. There's another one here about working in, I think probably as many of us do actually, in male-dominated environments. Mm. And there's an example here where somebody gives when they give audit feedback, it's mainly to men, and the person doesn't really feel that they belong because they don't have the business knowledge of, in this case, it's plumbing supplies, but it could be other aspects. And I really, your adult thing resonates with me, and so what I do, and I'm interested in your reflections on this, is I was once told by my coach is just go into that adult. It is, you know, we're all adults by the time we get to the world of work, and we bring different expertise. This woman is bringing audit expertise, and you can be confident when you've done a really rigorous piece of work, even though you're not in the depths of plumbing supplies. What would you recommend? Male-dominated environments, particularly.
Yeah, I think there's something about understanding your own worth and your own knowledge set that's really important. So where I say document your skills, what I mean is build those foundations so you know why you're in the room, what you bring to the party, what your knowledge base is, what your skill base is. And my view, and I know that this is not always simple depending on the personalities that you're dealing with, but my view is that you're always aiming for a dialogue. So when I was at the BSE inquiry, I was part of a civil service management team. So there were 3 of us running the inquiry, but there were a lot of very, very senior barristers and a very, very senior judge that were also involved in running the inquiry. And it was really, really difficult for the first few weeks because we didn't have a shared culture. And we had to learn to understand each other's culture. So what you're always aiming for is to be discussing things and be having a dialogue and be listening to each other. And if you feel that you've presented information that it isn't being heard and isn't being taken seriously, then I think sometimes it's worth saying that. You know, I've tried to explain A, B, C, and D, but I don't feel that you're engaging with that. And I know those are extraordinarily difficult conversations to have, but if all your professional expertise is telling you one thing and you can't get that landed, then I think it's sometimes incumbent on you to say, I don't seem to be able to get my point across. Not easy skills to have.
It is challenging. As I say, we're often dealing with people that are more senior, and that, you know, certainly I can speak to the civil service, that's just hierarchy things.
But I think you need to sort of slightly rethink the hierarchy thing, because we're all human beings, aren't we? And it's easy for me now because I've left Whitehall and I'm not trying to climb up the ladder anymore. But it's only by sort of changing the tone and changing the conversation that we actually change any of these things, isn't it?
There's a few here with a theme of sort of, is it ever too late? There's a lovely one here saying, let's say I consider myself mature, let's say, so is it ever too late to conquer? And another one related to that, do you get to the point where you don't feel the fear?
I think those are slightly different questions. So you would expect me, of course, to say, no, it's never too late. Of course not. I mean, how old is Joe Biden? You know, hoping to win the election in a couple of weeks. So I'm 55, 56 in about a week. I feel like I'm learning all the time. And some of it's really difficult to learn. But I think if you stop learning, you kind of, to me, that's the equivalent of giving up, really.
I really agree with that. I pip you by a year, Joe. So, and I also feel as though I'm really still learning pretty much every day, and you sort of can grow in confidence. And I think that thing you said about really focusing on the things that you're good at, and don't take those for granted. Not everybody has them, actually. Really helpful.
I think you had a second question though that I was going to say.
Yeah, about
after the mature one, you had a second one.
Yeah, it was. Do you get to the point? Do you get to the point where you don't feel the fear?
Well, you certainly don't get it by not trying. I mean, what I think happens is if you learn to ask for feedback and take risks and put yourself forward in this kind of smaller circle, then you can move to the bigger circle, and then you can move out by concentric circles. You know, would I say to somebody who was frightened of presentations, oh, we've got this great conference next week with 1,000 people, I think you should do the keynote speech? Well, no, of course not. But would I say to them, actually, we've got a breakout room with, 15 delegates, and they want to talk about this issue that I know that you've been working on. Could you run a workshop with them? Then yes. So I think it depends how much you want to flex that muscle. My best example is if you want to run 5K, you might well download the app onto your phone, but downloading the app onto your phone does not get you off the sofa. You have to run 3 times a week for 9 weeks to complete the course. So you have to actively engage with it.
Absolutely. And I'm here about confidence, and this really resonates with me. I find myself assuming others are more confident than me, thinking, how did they get to where they are, and how do I get there? Is confidence and imposter syndrome the same thing or different?
I think what I feel about imposter syndrome is it's a mixture of lack of confidence, of low self-esteem, and people who've had negative messaging in the past, or they've had difficult managers who have given them the wrong impression of themselves. And so I think it's a bit of a composite, really. And I think the confidence thing is fascinating because the more you talk to people, the more you realise, well, some people are just, are confident, that's great. But a lot of people are just confident on particular things. And you've assumed that because they're confident on that thing that they're an all-rounded confident person. I mean, you'll know this, Elizabeth, but often, chief executive officers and leaders of organisations, they're pretty clear what they're good at, but they're pretty clear what they're not good at. They've got that clarity. And then what they do is they try and make sure that other people in their organisation complement those things that they don't bring to the party. But frankly, if we expect one person to bring all those skills to the table, then we're not going to find anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I speaking for myself, I certainly know the things I'm not good at. I don't think I always know the things I am good at, which is confidence. And there's some comments and questions here, I think, about, and you raised it, the negative messaging. So where has that come from? There's a reflection here of somebody realising that actually it's come, as you mentioned, from previous employment where they were constantly, told perhaps not good enough or put down or whatever. But these things can go very deeply into childhood and parental comments and the rest. I mean, that is a lifetime of stuff to overcome. So there's a question here about where do you get your support from, and where would you suggest people get their support from?
So, you've been very open, Elizabeth, in the spirit of openness. I've had a lot of therapy. And I would highly recommend the type of therapy that I've had. I'm sure there are some terrible therapists out there. But I've needed a lot of support because I came from quite a difficult start in life. And then I think as you meet different challenges, you start to gain more confidence because you've met that challenge. It's like you've got over that hurdle and you can see that you achieved it and you can get on to the next thing. So there were two parts to that question. Where did I get my support from, and
where do you suggest others get their support from?
So I think there's different options. I think you can sort of set up your own mini support group at work with people that you trust. I think you then, the next level would be you can ask your organisation to pay for coaching, or you can set up mentoring in your own organisation. So, you don't have to wait for a mentor to be allocated to you. You can just ask somebody to be your mentor. I tend to say don't just recruit a mentor in your own image. Recruit somebody who you think is going to add to your skill set, or some people have two mentors for that reason. To bring different things to the party. If you're really sort of stuck in a sort of an emotional, with an emotional area, then maybe counselling or therapy is helpful if you're lucky enough to be able to afford that, or get on the NHS. But one thing, a really interesting thing happened to me a few years ago. I was knocked over by a cyclist. I was a pedestrian. I had a head injury. I was off work for about 4 or 5 months. And I used to go down to my local street for coffee, And the people who ran the shops would say, hello, how are you? And I'd say, oh, I'm fine, thanks. And they'd say, oh, I'm fine, thanks. And then after a few weeks, I started saying, well, actually, I'm not well. I've had this accident and I've got this head concussion and, you know, I'm not having a very good time. And my whole experience changed because they started telling me what was really going on in their lives, all these really interesting things that happened to them that they'd, you know, challenges that they'd faced. And it completely changed my relationship with them. So I think partly it's just about opening up, which is not easy, but it's partly about that, I think.
Well, thank you for being so open. Quite a few questions. I'm not sure we're going to get through them all. Really interesting, another interesting one. How to manage a scenario where your immediate manager has imposter syndrome. They can't see that someone more junior is actually capable of more. Fascinating.
Wow, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, there's a sort of truism in all of this that the only person you can change is yourself. So it's a truism because it's true. You know, you can have an impact on other people by telling them what you think and being assertive and just being genuine, but you can't change anybody else if they don't want to change. So I think the implication from that question is that the person with imposter syndrome can't see the skills around them. Is that right?
Absolutely, because they themselves, I mean, I sort of seen as well, somebody themselves has their manager has imposter syndrome, and they're sort of caught up in their own imposter syndrome and so can't see the skills of others, and maybe it makes them feel less confident by seeing the skills in others.
It's really important to try not to be infected by other people's lack of confidence. And I mean, if you've said, if you're trying to get a certain point across and you've said, you know, I think we can do this work, I think it'll be fine, I think we can do this research, etc., and you're not getting your point across, then there may be little that you can do. You might have to either go around the edges and talk to somebody else or think about whether that's the right team for you. You can't bring somebody with you if they're not willing to go with you. All you can do is stick to your guns and say, I know what I'm doing, I want to, you know, carry on doing what I know, you know, things that I do well. And if you feel you're being genuinely impeded and you don't know how to get around that, you might have to move.
Yeah, that's quite. And there's a few comments here about actually having having moved places, they realise that it's been like you did yourself, Joe. Sort of not the right environment in which to flourish. Reward and well, the one is about reward and recognition. So, Joe, what advice would you give to people who struggle with asking for the reward they deserve, i.e., higher pay or promotion, due to lack of confidence? And have you experienced this before?
I wasn't very good at asking for pay on reflection. I think you have to really be clear what your the same as documenting your skills. You have to be very clear what you've achieved against your objectives, and you have to be very clear, if you can, what's going on in the organisation about sort of pay parity and what people are being paid for equivalent roles and equivalent posts. And not get too involved with how the organisation may or may not be struggling with, you know, budget, or, you know, there's you know, if somebody wants to find another couple of grand for you, I'm sure they can. They'll tell you that they can't, but that's not a reality. So don't get too empathic with the person who's talking to you about their restrictions. And I think you need to really get so clear and so focused in your mind, and you need to practice it and probably write to the person that you're going to talk to beforehand, particularly if you're one of these people who finds it difficult to talk and think in real time. Maybe write it all out on an email and send it before you have the meeting, so that they know exactly what you're pitch is going to be. And get lessons from other people who've done it, who've been successful, and maybe try and develop more of a sharing culture in the organisation about what people are being paid, because certainly for the first 15 years of me being in Whitehall, nobody talked about what they were being paid.
And Jo, you've been very influential with us on the remuneration committee, really, really pushing rightly, and I fully agree with it, the equal pay audit and gender pay reporting and those things, which my own experience of pay is that it's most easily done at the time of joining. And read all those books that suggest that, and I'm going to stereotype here, but there's a tendency for women to be sort of grateful for what they're offered, but at the time of joining is the time to really negotiate, in my experience.
And I think we should also perhaps say, Elizabeth, that what we know from our own research in GIAA is that the male joiners are much better at negotiating at that point than the female joiners.
And that's, Cheryl Sandberg about that as well, and at the university, so really push it at the beginning. There's somebody here very helpfully, thank you, Jane, saying, I've done this and asked for more pay and been successful. I'm willing to share my experience with the person if someone wants to get in touch. Thank you very much, Jane, for that. There's a comment rather than a question. I think many people with families would recognise of having had a career break to have a family. I feel I have a lot of catching up to do, and I think, which I think contributes to my imposter syndrome. So coming back in after having had a career break, that's more of a reflection. Just see if we've got a couple of more minutes. Lots of thanks to you, Jo, for the session. Being able to talk about this and bring it into the open already helped in removing some of the fear. Thank you so much for this session. It's been brilliant. And a few others as well.
How much talking about the career break one, which is that I think when you join an organisation or when you come back into an organisation, I think it's incumbent on you to be really demanding. And I think the problem is that you don't know what you don't know. But to ask for as much input and training and induction as you possibly can, and spend all your time sort of reaching out and trying to work out what the informal cultures of the organisation are, not just the formal cultures. But maybe as a joiner, as a rejoiner, it's almost better to treat it as you're a new starter and that you need lots of help, really.
There was one, I can't quite find it again now, but about how much talking about it is too much. What's the balance between seeking support and being needy?
It's not so much about talking about it all the time, it's about doing it. So talking and seeking support is no good if you don't build these muscles at the same time, build these emotional muscles at the same time. So unless you're going home, well, not that we go home anymore, but unless you're going and actually physically doing the work around what are my skills, what am I good at, what is my experience base, what is my knowledge base, unless you're physically doing that, then it just becomes a sort of moaning opportunity. And we all need a moaning opportunity, but then people get bored with you moaning after a while. So it's this combination of sharing and doing. It's not just sharing.
Well, Jo, I think given the time, we probably need to draw it to a close. Lots of people expressing their thanks, and thanks also absolutely to the Chartered Institute and WIIA. So do you want to put your contact details? I think you've got a slide with your contact details. So please do get in touch with Jo if you're interested in learning more about what was discussed today. You might also be interested in a course that the Chartered Institute is delivering on resilience, bouncing back from adversity. Can't speak this morning. Bouncing back from adversity. And the next one will take place on the 3rd of November. Also, a reminder that CPE points will be issued to all attendees within 10 working days. And a trailer, the next WIIA event will take place on the 8th of December, and we'll look at audit planning in a dynamic environment. And goodness me, that's incredibly relevant for the crisis we're in at the moment. So thank you, Jo, hugely. If we could give you applause, we would, but thank you very much. And thank you all attendees very much indeed. Goodbye.